The fastest way to lose respect is to assume you already deserve it. Nobody in the parking lot knew those words would become painfully relevant less than 30 seconds later. The afternoon sun hung low over the suburban community center just outside Charlotte, North Carolina, casting long shadows across rows of parked vehicles. Parents waited near the entrance. Teenagers bounced basketballs on the cracked asphalt courts behind the building. A warm breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass through the air. It should have been an ordinary Tuesday. Then the patrol car arrived. The blue and white cruiser rolled into the lot and stopped abruptly near an aging dark green Ford pickup. The driver's door opened. Officer Ryan Mitchell stepped out with the confidence of a man who had spent years believing his badge spoke louder than anyone else. His polished sunglasses reflected the golden sunlight as he scanned the parking lot. His attention settled immediately on the man standing beside the pickup. The man looked completely ordinary. Mid-50s, black, average height, weathered brown jacket, faded jeans. A cardboard box filled with school supplies rested in his arms. Nothing about him suggested power. Nothing about him suggested influence. Nothing about him suggested that within the next few minutes, everything Ryan believed he understood about authority would begin to unravel. The man calmly closed the tailgate of his truck and smiled toward a group of teenagers leaving the community center. "See you guys next week," he called. Several students waved back enthusiastically. One of them held up a basketball and shouted, "Don't forget you promised a rematch, Mr. Brooks." The man laughed softly. "You finally beat me once, and suddenly you think you're a champion." The students grinned as they headed toward the sidewalk. Ryan watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. He had received a report less than 10 minutes earlier. A concerned resident from a nearby gated neighborhood had called dispatch. The complaint was vague. Suspicious individual. Loitering. Unknown intentions. The description had been even vaguer. Middle-aged black male. Old pickup truck. Ryan believed he had found his person. He approached with deliberate steps. The sound of his boots against the pavement echoed through the lot. The man turned politely. "Afternoon, officer." Ryan ignored the greeting. His gaze moved from the truck to the cardboard box and back again. "That your vehicle?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "You been hanging around here long?" The man remained calm. "Just finished volunteering inside." Ryan glanced toward the community center. Something about the answer irritated him. Maybe it was the confidence. Maybe it was the lack of nervousness. Maybe it was the simple fact that the man refused to fit the story Ryan had already constructed in his head. License and registration. The man blinked once. "May I ask why?" A few parents nearby slowed their conversations. The atmosphere shifted almost instantly. Tiny fragments of silence began spreading through the parking lot. Ryan folded his arms. "Because I'm asking." The man adjusted the box in his hands. "Of course, officer. I'd just like to understand the reason for the stop." Ryan took a step closer. His jaw tightened. The crowd's attention drifted toward them. A mother paused while loading groceries into her SUV. Two teenagers stopped beside the basketball court fence. Even the wind seemed quieter. Ryan removed his sunglasses. "Listen carefully," he said. His voice carried across the parking lot. "Around here, I don't need to explain every decision I make." The man said nothing. Ryan leaned forward slightly. Then he delivered the sentence that caused several heads to turn. "Because I'm the law here." For a brief moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The golden afternoon seemed to freeze in place. The man standing beside the pickup simply looked at him, calm and unreadable, while somewhere in the distance, a basketball bounced once against the pavement and rolled away. The man beside the pickup did not react immediately. He simply held Ryan Mitchell's gaze for a moment, as though weighing whether the conversation was worth having at all. Then he lowered the cardboard box onto the truck bed with careful hands. The supplies inside shifted softly. Notebooks, pens, geometry sets. Things most people would overlook. Things Ethan Brooks never did. "I understand, officer," he said calmly. "I was only asking a question." Ryan remained rigid. The tension in the parking lot grew heavier. Several parents continued watching from a distance. Nobody intervened. Nobody left. There was something about Ethan's composure that made people curious. Most individuals became defensive when confronted. Ethan seemed almost impossible to rattle. He folded his hands loosely in front of him and waited. The late afternoon sunlight illuminated the silver strands beginning to appear in his hair. His face carried the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades listening more than speaking. Across the lot, one of the teenagers from the basketball program nudged his friend. "That is Mr. Brooks," he whispered. "He helps everybody." His friend nodded. Nearly everyone involved with the community center knew Ethan. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, he volunteered after work. He tutored students struggling with reading comprehension. He organized scholarship workshops. He spent countless hours helping young people fill out college applications. Many of the teenagers arriving at the center came from neighborhoods where opportunities often felt distant. Ethan made those opportunities feel real. Yet none of that showed on the outside. His truck was nearly 15 years old. The paint had faded under Carolina summers. The driver's seat had a small tear repaired with dark stitching. His jacket had clearly been worn for years. To a casual observer, he looked like an ordinary working man finishing another ordinary day. Ryan seemed determined to keep it that way. "You said you were volunteering," he replied. "What exactly were you doing?" Ethan gestured toward the building behind him. "Mentoring students." "And you do that often?" "Every week." Ryan glanced toward the center. The answer appeared to disappoint him. There was nothing suspicious about it. Nothing alarming. Nothing that justified the assumptions forming in his mind. Yet he continued searching for something. Anything. A woman carrying a reusable grocery bag paused near her vehicle. She recognized Ethan immediately. He had once spent 3 weekends helping her son prepare for a scholarship interview. Nearby, a maintenance worker stopped sweeping leaves and quietly watched the exchange unfold. Ethan noticed none of it. Or perhaps he noticed all of it and simply chose not to react. Patience had become second nature to him years ago, long before the community center, long before the volunteer programs, long before Charlotte knew his name. Ryan finally extended his hand. "Identification." Ethan nodded once. "Certainly." He reached slowly toward the inside pocket of his jacket. The movement was deliberate, respectful, calm. Yet something about the moment felt significant. The air seemed strangely still. The teenagers near the fence had stopped talking altogether. The breeze that had carried laughter through the parking lot only minutes earlier now moved quietly through the trees. Ethan's fingers touched the wallet inside his jacket. Then he paused, not because he was nervous, not because he was afraid, because for the first time since the conversation began, he appeared disappointed, deeply disappointed. His eyes drifted briefly toward the students leaving the center. Several of them were watching, learning, absorbing every word, every action, every example. Ethan understood something Ryan did not. Moments like this did not end when people walked away. They stayed with those who witnessed them. And somewhere deep inside, that realization seemed to trouble him far more than the officer standing in front of him. Ryan Mitchell watched Ethan's hand remain inside his jacket pocket for a second longer than expected. The pause seemed to irritate him. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Ethan slowly removed his wallet and opened it. "No problem at all, officer." His voice remained steady. The calmness only deepened the contrast between the two men. Ryan took the identification card without offering thanks. His eyes dropped briefly to the name. Ethan Brooks. Charlotte address. Everything appeared ordinary. He handed it back almost immediately. "What kind of work do you do?" Ethan slipped the card into his wallet. "I work in public service." Ryan frowned. The answer felt incomplete. "That can mean a lot of things." Ethan nodded. "Yes, it can." Several people exchanged glances. The maintenance worker leaned on his broom. The mother near the sport utility vehicle remained frozen beside the open rear door. Nobody understood why the conversation continued. There was no crime, no disturbance, no complaint from anyone actually standing in the parking lot. Yet Ryan seemed unwilling to let the encounter end. Deep down, he felt something slipping away. The certainty he had arrived with was beginning to crack. He had expected nervousness, excuses, maybe frustration. Instead, he found patience, professionalism, confidence. It unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Across the parking lot, the glass doors of the community center opened again. A woman stepped outside carrying a stack of folders. Her name was Angela Morris, the center director. She spotted Ethan immediately and smiled before noticing the officer. The smile faded slightly. Angela had worked with Ethan for almost 7 years. She knew how many scholarships he had funded anonymously. She knew how many students called him when they needed advice. She knew how many families had been helped by someone who never asked for recognition. Ryan noticed her watching. "You know him?" he asked. "Of course," Angela replied. Everyone here knows Mr. Brooks. Ryan folded his arms again. Really? Angela nodded. The center would not have half its programs without him. Ethan looked mildly uncomfortable as soon as the attention shifted toward him. Recognition had never interested him. In fact, he often avoided it. Ryan glanced between them. Something in the exchange bothered him. The pieces no longer matched the picture he had imagined. Yet instead of stepping back, he pushed forward. "So you spend your free time helping kids?" he asked. "I try to," Ethan answered. "Somebody helped me when I was young. I believe you should return that gift." The words landed softly. No drama. No lecture. Just simple truth. A teenager standing near the basketball court lowered his head. Ethan had once spent 3 months helping him prepare for a college entrance exam. Another student remembered Ethan driving 20 miles during a rainstorm to attend a school debate competition because nobody from the boys' family could make it. Stories like that existed all over Charlotte. Ryan knew none of them. He only saw the jacket, the truck, the assumptions he had already made. The sunlight continued sinking toward the horizon. Golden reflections stretched across the parking lot windows. Somewhere nearby, a flag fluttered gently above the community center entrance. Ethan followed the movement with his eyes for a brief moment before looking back at Ryan. The disappointment remained there. Quiet. Unmistakable. Not because he was being questioned. Not because he felt embarrassed. But because dozens of young eyes were watching an interaction that should have represented trust. Instead, it was becoming a lesson neither man had planned to teach. Ryan Mitchell glanced toward Angela Morris, then back at Ethan Brooks. The growing attention around them was becoming impossible to ignore. Parents lingered beside their vehicles. Students remained near the basketball court instead of heading home. Even passing traffic seemed slower as drivers noticed the unusual gathering in the community center parking lot. Ryan felt the weight of those eyes, but instead of stepping away, he doubled down. "If you help this place so much," he said, "then you should not mind answering a few more questions." Ethan nodded politely. "I have answered every question you have asked, officer." The response was respectful, but it carried a quiet truth that several people immediately recognized. Ryan heard it too. His expression tightened. "Then answer another one. Why are you carrying all those supplies?" Ethan glanced toward the cardboard box resting in the truck bed. "Because school starts next week." Ryan waited. Ethan continued. "Some of the students cannot afford everything they need. We collected donations." Angela spoke up. "Those supplies are for the scholarship program." Ryan barely acknowledged her. His attention remained fixed on Ethan. "And you paid for those?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Some of them." A teenage girl standing near the entrance lowered her eyes. Inside that box were notebooks Ethan had personally purchased after learning her family was struggling financially. He had never mentioned it to anyone. Ryan did not know that. He only saw another answer that refused to fit the story he wanted. The golden sunlight softened across the parking lot. Long shadows stretched beneath the vehicles. The atmosphere had changed completely. What began as a routine stop now felt strangely personal. Ethan remained calm, but Ryan seemed increasingly determined to establish control over the situation. "Open the truck," Ryan said. A murmur moved through the crowd. Ethan looked at him carefully. "May I ask what you are looking for?" Ryan folded his arms. "I am asking the questions." Ethan paused, not out of fear, out of concern. His eyes briefly moved toward the students still watching from the sidewalk. They were seeing every word, every decision, every example. Then he reached into his pocket and produced the truck keys. "Of course," he said. He walked toward the driver's side and unlocked the door. Ryan immediately began looking through the visible contents. The teenagers watched silently. Parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. Inside the truck, there was nothing remarkable. A worn Bible rested on the passenger seat. Several folders sat neatly stacked beside it. A reusable coffee mug occupied the center console. Ryan opened the rear door. More folders. More paperwork. Nothing suspicious. Nothing unusual. Yet one folder partially slid from a stack and landed on the seat cushion. Ryan picked it up. Across the front were several printed pages filled with legal notes and handwritten comments. His eyes scanned the top sheet briefly. The terminology looked advanced. Complex. Professional. He frowned. Ethan calmly reached forward. "Please be careful with those." Ryan looked up. "Why?" Ethan answered honestly. "Because they are important." For the first time since arriving, Ryan hesitated. The folder in his hands seemed completely out of place inside an old pickup truck owned by the man he had already decided to underestimate. Around them, the parking lot remained silent. The breeze moved gently through the trees overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang the hour. And standing beside his truck, Ethan Brooks continued to display the same patience he had shown from the very beginning, while Ryan unknowingly stood one step closer to discovering that the man in front of him was far different from the image he had created in his mind. Ryan Mitchell continued holding the folder longer than necessary. His eyes moved across the pages, trying to make sense of the legal language spread before him. The terms were unfamiliar. References to federal statutes, judicial review, constitutional interpretation, and appellate precedent filled the margins with handwritten notes. Nothing about the documents looked casual. Nothing about them belonged to the image Ryan had created the moment he stepped out of his patrol car. He slowly closed the folder. "What exactly are these?" he asked. Ethan Brooks answered without hesitation. "Work materials." Ryan looked unconvinced. "Work materials for what?" Ethan smiled politely. "Public service, like I mentioned." A few students exchanged confused glances. Angela Morris remained silent near the entrance. She had known Ethan long enough to recognize the careful restraint in his answers. He was not hiding anything. He was simply refusing to turn the situation into a spectacle. Unfortunately, the situation was already becoming one. More people had gathered near the parking lot. Several parents delayed leaving. A delivery driver parked near the curb and remained inside his van watching through the windshield. The atmosphere felt heavier than before. Ryan handed the folder back. "You are being unusually vague." Ethan accepted it carefully and placed it inside the truck. "I am answering every question truthfully, officer." Ryan removed his radio from his shoulder and quietly requested additional information through dispatch. He stepped a few feet away while waiting for a response. Ethan remained beside the truck. The students watched him. Some looked worried. Others looked confused. One young boy finally approached. He could not have been older than 12. His backpack hung loosely from one shoulder. "Mr. Brooks?" he asked softly. Ethan immediately turned toward him. "Yes, Daniel." The boy hesitated. "Are you in trouble?" The question landed harder than anything Ryan had said all afternoon. Ethan looked at the child for a moment before answering. "No, son. Everything is fine." Daniel nodded, but uncertainty remained in his eyes. He slowly returned to the sidewalk. Ethan watched him go. That disappointment returned again, deeper this time. Not because of the questions, not because of the attention, because children were learning lessons from every second of this encounter. Ryan returned from the radio call. His expression suggested he still had not found what he expected. If anything, the lack of evidence seemed to frustrate him more. "Dispatch cannot find anything connected to the complaint," he admitted. Several people visibly relaxed. The interaction should have ended right there. Most reasonable observers expected it to. Ethan certainly gave him the opportunity. "Then perhaps there was a misunderstanding," he said gently. Ryan stared at him. The words were respectful. They even offered an easy exit. Yet pride can be difficult to abandon once it takes hold. Ryan glanced toward the truck one last time. His eyes settled on a leather portfolio partially visible beneath the folders. A gold emblem reflected the fading sunlight for a brief moment. Ryan noticed it immediately. So did Ethan. For the first time all afternoon, Ethan's expression changed. Only slightly, but enough. The calm remained. The patience remained. Yet there was now a quiet recognition in his eyes, as though he realized this encounter was approaching a moment neither man could stop. The evening sun continued sinking behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold while the entire parking lot waited for what would happen next. The parking lot grew unusually quiet. Not the uncomfortable silence of conflict, but the kind that settles over a place when everyone senses something important is about to happen. The evening sun drifted lower behind the trees surrounding the community center, washing the pavement in soft gold light. Long shadows stretched across the rows of parked cars. A gentle breeze moved through the American flag above the entrance, causing it to ripple softly against the fading sky. Ethan Brooks stood beside his truck without speaking. The leather portfolio remained partially visible beneath the stack of folders. He made no effort to hide it. He made no effort to reveal it either. Instead, he rested one hand on the truck bed and watched the students preparing to leave for the evening. Their laughter had disappeared. Their conversations had faded. Most of them were still watching him. Watching Ryan. Watching a moment they would remember long after this day ended. Daniel, the young boy who had asked whether Ethan was in trouble, stood near the sidewalk holding his backpack straps. Ethan noticed him immediately. The child looked worried. Not frightened. Simply confused. Ethan understood that feeling. He had seen it many times before. Children often struggled when the world failed to match the values adults taught them. Respect, fairness, trust. Those words were easy to say, harder to demonstrate. Ethan slowly walked toward Daniel. Ryan remained where he stood, observing. Nobody spoke. The only sound came from leaves rustling in the trees overhead. When Ethan reached the boy, he smiled warmly. You should get home before your mother starts worrying. Daniel hesitated. Are you sure everything is okay? Ethan nodded. I am sure. You promise? Ethan's smile widened slightly. I promise. The boy finally relaxed. Not completely, but enough. He nodded and began walking toward the parking lot exit. Several other students followed. One by one, they disappeared into the warm evening light. Ethan watched until they were gone. Only then did he turn back toward the truck. Something about that simple exchange affected several people standing nearby. Angela Morris lowered her eyes briefly. The maintenance worker leaned quietly against his broom. Even some of the parents seemed less interested in the confrontation than in the man at the center of it. Ryan noticed all of it. He noticed the respect Ethan commanded without demanding it. He noticed how people trusted him instinctively. He noticed how calm he remained despite everything that had happened. Yet instead of making Ryan more comfortable, those observations unsettled him. Because authority was supposed to look a certain way, at least in Ryan's mind. It was supposed to come from uniforms, titles, procedures, and visible power. Ethan possessed none of those things on the surface. And yet somehow, everyone listened when he spoke. The sun continued sinking beyond the horizon. Golden reflections shimmered across the truck windows. The leather portfolio remained untouched. Ryan's eyes drifted toward it once more. Ethan followed the glance. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Neither man said anything. Neither man moved. But something had shifted. The encounter was no longer about suspicion. No longer about questions. No longer about control. The truth stood quietly between them now, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Ryan Mitchell finally took a slow step toward the truck. The last traces of sunlight glimmered across the windshield as the evening sky deepened into shades of amber and blue. For several seconds, neither man spoke. The small crowd remained scattered throughout the parking lot, quiet and attentive. Ryan's eyes settled once more on the leather portfolio resting beneath the folders. This time he did not look away. What is inside that? He asked. Ethan Brooks followed his gaze. The question did not surprise him. In truth, it felt inevitable. He reached calmly into the truck and lifted the portfolio with both hands. The leather was worn but carefully maintained. Years of use had softened the edges. Ryan noticed the gold seal embossed on the front. His confidence faltered slightly. Something about the emblem felt familiar. Official. Important. Ethan opened the portfolio and removed a thin folder. Then he handed it forward without a word. Ryan accepted it automatically. The parking lot seemed to grow even quieter. He opened the folder. At first he only saw paperwork. Official letterhead. Federal seals. Judicial correspondence. Then his eyes found the name. His breathing stopped for a moment. He looked down again. Then once more. Certain he had misread it. The words remained unchanged. The Honorable Ethan Brooks. United States Court of Appeals. Ryan stared at the page. His face slowly lost color. Around them, nobody understood what had happened. Not yet. Ethan remained completely still. There was no satisfaction in his expression. No triumph. No anger. Only patience. Ryan turned another page. Then another. Every document confirmed the same reality. The man standing beside the aging pickup truck. The volunteer who spent afternoons helping children complete scholarship applications. The quiet mentor known throughout the community center. He was one of the most respected federal judges in the region. Ryan looked up. The confidence that had carried him through the entire encounter was gone. You are. His voice failed. Ethan answered gently. Yes. The single word seemed to echo through the parking lot. Angela Morris closed her eyes briefly. Several parents exchanged stunned glances. The maintenance worker lowered his broom. Even those who could not see the documents immediately sensed the shift. Authority had reversed direction without warning. Ryan glanced down again. Every assumption he had made over the past hour now stood exposed. The old truck, the worn jacket, the quiet demeanor. None of it had revealed who Ethan truly was. And Ethan had never once used his title to protect himself, never once mentioned his position, never once demanded special treatment. That realization struck harder than the discovery itself. Ethan slowly closed the folder and accepted it back. The evening breeze moved gently through the trees. Somewhere beyond the parking lot, church bells rang in the distance. Ryan struggled to find words. Ethan saved him from the effort. "Officer," he said quietly, "a person's value should never depend on what title appears on a document." Ryan lowered his eyes. For the first time all evening, he had no response. And standing beneath the fading light, surrounded by witnesses who had watched every moment unfold, he finally understood that the most important lesson taught that day had nothing to do with the law at all. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The evening air felt different now, lighter in some ways and heavier in others. The truth had settled over the parking lot like the final note of a song that nobody expected to hear. Ryan Mitchell stood silently beside the truck. The authority he had relied on throughout the encounter suddenly felt very small compared to the quiet dignity of the man standing across from him. Ethan Brooks carefully returned the documents to the leather portfolio and placed it back inside the vehicle. His movements were unhurried, deliberate, calm, the same calm he had shown from the very beginning. Ryan finally cleared his throat. "Your Honor." The words sounded unfamiliar coming from him. Ethan looked up. Ryan lowered his eyes for a moment before speaking again. "I owe you an apology." Nobody interrupted. Parents, students, and staff members listened in complete silence. Ryan took a slow breath. "I made assumptions I should not have made. I should have handled this differently." Ethan studied him for a moment. The apology was not perfect. It was not polished, but it was genuine. That mattered. Angela Morris watched from near the entrance. Several students remained nearby, listening carefully. Ethan glanced toward them before returning his attention to Ryan. "Officer, do you know what concerns me most about today?" Ryan shook his head. "No, sir." Ethan looked toward the sidewalk where Daniel and several other students had stopped before leaving. Most were still watching from a distance. "Those young people." Ryan followed his gaze. Ethan continued. "Every child here learned something today. The question is whether the lesson was a good one." Ryan looked down. The words struck deeper than criticism ever could. Ethan stepped closer, not as a judge speaking to an officer, but as a mentor speaking to another human being. "You thought this was about authority," he said softly. "It never was." The breeze moved gently through the trees overhead. The sky continued darkening into shades of deep blue and gold. Ethan folded his hands in front of him. "The law is not a badge. It is not a title. It is not a position. The law only means something when people trust it." Ryan listened carefully. "And trust begins with respect." Ethan smiled faintly. "Exactly." A long silence followed. Then something unexpected happened. Ryan nodded. Not defensively, not reluctantly. He nodded because he understood. For the first time all afternoon, he truly understood. "I will remember that," he said quietly. Ethan believed him. He could hear it in his voice. The students seemed to relax. The tension that had hovered over the parking lot for more than an hour finally began to fade. Ryan looked toward the community center, then back at Ethan. "You could file a complaint." Ethan smiled gently. "I could." Ryan waited. Ethan glanced toward the children once more. "But I would rather see growth than punishment." The words seemed to surprise everyone, including Ryan. Ethan reached into the truck, closed the tailgate, and picked up the box of school supplies. "What matters now is what happens next." Ryan stood quietly as those words settled into the evening air. For the first time that day, nobody was thinking about rank, titles, or authority. They were thinking about character. And standing in the fading sunlight, Ethan Brooks had just taught a lesson far more powerful than any courtroom ruling. 1 month later, the memory of that evening had not disappeared from the community. In many ways, it had only grown stronger. The leaves had begun changing colors across Charlotte, painting the streets with shades of gold and crimson. Cool autumn air drifted through the city as families settled into new routines and students adjusted to another school year. At the community center, life continued much as it always had. Children arrived after school carrying backpacks. Volunteers organized activities. Basketballs echoed across the gym floor. Yet something felt different. The lesson from that evening remained alive in quiet ways. On a Thursday afternoon, Ethan Brooks stood near the entrance helping a group of students review scholarship essays. The familiar pickup truck sat in its usual parking space beneath a maple tree whose leaves glowed orange in the afternoon sun. Inside the center, laughter and conversation filled the hallways. Ethan listened carefully as one student read a personal statement aloud. Another asked for help revising a paragraph. A third simply wanted reassurance before submitting an application. Ethan gave each of them his full attention. He always did. A few minutes later, the front doors opened. Several students looked up. So did Angela Morris. Standing near the entrance was Ryan Mitchell. He was not there on official business. He carried no sense of authority, no urgency, no expectations. In his hands was a box filled with school supplies, notebooks, calculators, pens, art materials, the same kinds of items Ethan had been providing for years. Ryan paused briefly before walking forward. Ethan noticed him immediately. Their eyes met. Neither man spoke for a moment. Then Ryan placed the box on a nearby table. "I thought the students might be able to use these," he said. Ethan smiled. "They certainly will." Ryan nodded. The conversation could have ended there. But something important happened next. Several students approached to help unload the supplies. Ryan stayed. He listened as they spoke about classes, college plans, and future careers. He answered questions. He encouraged them. He learned their names. Slowly, the distance between observer and participant disappeared. Across the room, Angela watched quietly. She understood what was happening. Growth rarely arrived through dramatic moments. More often, it arrived through small decisions repeated consistently over time. As the afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, Ethan returned to reviewing essays while Ryan helped organize supplies. Nobody mentioned the past. Nobody needed to. The lesson had already done its work. Outside, the American flag moved gently in the breeze. Inside, students laughed as they carried boxes into classrooms. The sound filled every corner of the building. As evening approached, Ethan gathered his papers and prepared to leave. Before walking outside, he glanced back through the hallway. Ryan was helping a young student stack books onto a shelf. The boy was smiling. Ryan was smiling too. Ethan said nothing. He simply watched for a moment. Then he stepped into the cool autumn air. The golden light of sunset stretched across the parking lot. Leaves drifted slowly from the trees overhead. Somewhere behind him, children continued laughing. Ethan walked toward his truck, unlocked the door, and paused briefly before climbing inside. The world remained imperfect. It always would. But sometimes respect was learned. Sometimes understanding replaced assumptions. And sometimes the quietest victories were the ones that changed people forever.